Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Suicide Prevention for New York K-12 Schools and Districts. We are delighted to have Max Banilivy presenting today, and he's going to share a lot of great information. Before he starts, I want to do a little housekeeping and talk for a couple minutes about Kognito. I am Jennifer Spiegler. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships here. I think some of you out there know me already, and I hope I'll have the chance to meet others of you in the future. Today's presentation will be recorded. A copy of that recording will be sent to you after the presentation along with a set of slides, so you can be sure that you're going to have those to use and to share as needed. You are in listen-only mode, so please submit your questions on the right side of your screen. You can see the little question dialog box. If you want to try it out and see if it works, you can say hi and let us know where you're from. You can let us know whether you are on a scale of 1 to 5 prepared for suicide prevention in your school or district, with 1 being low and 5 being high. We won't conduct a formal poll today, but just give us a shout out and let us know you're there. And if you're a good multitasker, you can connect with us on social media. So the main body of our presentation today, as I mentioned, is with Max Banilivy. Max is a clinical psychologist and is the director of the Family Wellness Center for the past 32 years. He's been providing comprehensive multidisciplinary behavioral and emotional health services, training and consultation nationally to school districts, private and nonprofit communities, as well as government, including military agencies. He's also the director of clinical training, education, and internship programs at the Well Life Network in New York City and Long Island. His education at the highest level includes postdoctoral training and eating disorders and family therapy from Harvard Medical School's Children's Hospital and Judge Baker Guidance Center. Dr. Banilivy's specialty areas include, but are not limited to, coping and resiliency, couples and marriage, parenting, motivational interviewing, ethics, eating disorders, self-injury, and assessment, management, and prevention of suicide risk through training and education. Dr. Banilivy speaks widely on a variety of topics. He currently is spending much of his time regionally as well as at the state and national level training members of the community and professionals on suicide risk identification, prevention, intervention, and postvention, which he'll tell us more about today. He has published and served on the boards of professional organizations. He's been the co-chair of the Consortium of Suicide Prevention Trainers for New York State until 2015, which focused on education and training for suicide prevention. He's also on the executive board of the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Long Island, where they've developed a website, and he's been responsible for the coordination of training and education for that region. An annual suicide prevention conference is organized as part of the focus of that board. Dr. Banilivy has been recognized for his work in the field of suicide prevention by Living Works Organization as a Trainer of the Year and by the New York State Suicide Prevention Center for Excellence in Suicide Prevention. And we are delighted to have Max join us. Before I turn it over to Max, I just want to make sure that you know who we are. We are Kognito, a New York-based health simulation company where our focus is on conversation and specifically conversations for health. Conversation, as we think of it here at Kognito, is a powerful tool to inspire and inform, impact how people think and act, evoke empathy, and change lives. In our history of working in health simulations, we have had the honor of training over 300,000 educators in over 11,000 schools. That includes hundreds of schools in New York City and across New York State. If you haven't had a chance to experience a Kognito simulation, I encourage you to do that. our portfolio is online at www.kognito.com. If we have a little bit of time at the end of Max's presentation, we'll do a quick demo for you. Otherwise, we will send you a link to a demo. And new for this coming year will be a simulation based around the topic of postvention. So we're very excited about that. And last but not least, Kognito is the only organization with health simulations listed in SAMHSA's National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. So without further ado, and thank you all especially for coming today and taking time out of your back-to-school preparations to join us for a very important topic and information about suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. Thank you all, and thank you, Max. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, and good day, everyone. I want to thank Jen in particular and Kognito because this presentation, which is an informational one, is very apropos in terms of what school districts have been talking about trying to generate plans for suicide prevention in terms of going forward as changes are happening at the state level and otherwise with regard to provision of certain trainings on regular basis at school district levels. This is going to be a communication. I'm glad Jen used that term because this is going to be an informational type of a presentation. We're going to share some information with you and hopefully allow enough time where you can submit a lot of questions. It's really kind of a simulation, if you will. What I do in my capacity is that I engage and interface with many school districts who have either experienced the suicide or they're thinking about putting some plans together. So I have a conversation with them. And that conversation involves many, many questions. So today I'm going to be posing a lot of questions. We're obviously not going to have an opportunity to answer all of them in detail, but there are going to be a lot of questions, and if you will, I would like all of you to think as though you're going to, you have this question in mind as to how do we prevent suicide among youth in our schools? That would be our overarching question. And with that question in mind, we are going to go forward. We're going to share with you many resources also, and I'm going to go into some of those resources in some detail, but we're going to give you a lot of references and places to go and to get more information. So if I may start, I'm going to start by saying that New York State is a zero suicide state. And as you see on your screen, is really a commitment to suicide prevention, originally in the health and behavioral health care systems, but in general for us to think about, we need to look at all the ingredients and elements involved in our community and what we do in order to prevent suicides in general, but in our case, in order for us to at least reduce, if not prevent, suicide of youth that we educate. So it's a continuing, what I've quoted here is that it's a relentless pursuit of reducing suicide. That means this is not a one-shot deal. This is not something we do one time. This is not something we do like some of our standard required trainings that we present one time and then we have satisfied the requirement. This is a mindset that we need to create in terms of going forward. A mindset that is not just the mindset of one specialty or one professional. It's really a cross-section of many, 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 many different people that we need to be involved in this mission. And our mission is an extremely important one, because we all know what happens, sadly and tragically, when we lose a young one into suicide. So, so we know. I've been fortunate that I've been trained, I've been supported, and I continue to interact and participate and collaborate and cooperate with New York State Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Center in particular, with regard to some of these efforts. And New York State has been absolutely at the forefront with a few other states in the country in terms of really looking at this mission and looking at this problem and issue in a very comprehensive way. In fact, the previous Commissioner of Office of Mental Health was one of the fathers, if you will, and has been and continues to be an integral part of zero suicide, as well as the efforts nationally in terms of preventing suicide. Going to the next one this is something we would like to point out often, that indeed suicide is one of the most preventable causes of death among youth. And the question here is all right, if it's so preventable, and it is, then what role each of us play or should play in this process? So some of you in schools, you may have a very good program already in place, and hopefully you'll continue with that and add to it. Some of you may have some programs that you feel like it works to some extent, and maybe it's not good enough. And some of you may not have a comprehensive program. So hopefully you entertain some of those questions during the next few minutes that we have together. So we're going to be talking about resources as we go forward to the school districts. Suicide, sadly enough, it continues to be a very serious public health problem. Note that I don't speak about it as a very serious mental health problem, and I say public health problem, and there's a very good reason for it, that you certainly do not have to be mentally ill to think about suicide. Suicide is part of the human condition, and any one of us could have thoughts of suicide at any point given the right set of circumstances. For youth, that picture is a little bit different. We all know about that. We're not going to discuss it here, but their developmental vulnerability by definition is a risk factor, let alone all the internal and external pressures that youth undertake and experience throughout their schoolings. So we would like to approach suicide prevention from a public health point of view, because it is preventable, that it widens the net, and like any public health problem, we would suggest that we should approach it from many different angles. And as I mentioned, mental health, very often when we deal with schools and so on, and certainly we deal with higher administration, when I talk to them about suicide, they immediately say, okay, you know what, talk to the mental health staff. That's very appropriate. But we also know that mental health staff do not always have the possibility of being everywhere. And we also, as we said before, suicide prevention does involve every single person in the school, because the youth or young people who have thoughts of suicide do not necessarily go to the mental health professional in the school and say, I'm in trouble, I have these thoughts. And they may say it to the person at the cafeteria, they may say it to the gym teacher, but as we know, they very often talk about it with their peers. So there are many, many people that are in a position to do something about that should they so and be inclined to do so. So going forward, we know that school districts their primary focus is education. However, we also at the same time, we know that how much of their efforts are invested in trying to take care of young people whose socio-emotional well-being is interfering with their education, and by definition, those need to be addressed in order for them to learn optimally. So, suicide prevention in schools requires a number of considerations. It requires many different people sitting at the table to discuss. And we feel like most importantly, we need to have an initial conversation. But aside from the initial conversation, for us to really think about, all right, who should we have at this table? And think about how we're going to bring the certain kind of information, key information, and education and development into the schools. Now, I didn't want to today get into a lot of statistics that are available at the Center for Disease Control and our many, many, many different websites. But I think it's important for us to have the conversation that we're going to have by just looking at very, very powerful and basic information. Now, if we look at high schools for the sake of conversation, we know that at least, and these are probably underestimations, close to 18% of 9 to 12 graders have seriously thought about suicide. And 8 to 9% of them have actually made plans. Now, the numbers are very concerning, and if we all consider those numbers scary enough, which they are, then the question becomes, how do we take this into account? And it's a good question at this point is, if you were to be an administrator of a building, a principal, assistant principal, and you think close to 18%, or let's say 18% of the young people that every day walk into my building have thought about suicide. And in fact, maybe close to 10%, 1 out of 10 students that walks into my building actually has made a plan as to how they're going to kill themselves. If I have that information, would I approach the students differently? More specifically, if I have that information at hand, and I know that is statistically valid, would I approach the students differently in terms of suicide prevention? Would I speak to them differently? Would I educate my staff differently? Would I only focus on the staff and the students that may be perhaps at risk? So these are the questions we want to entertain. I want you to think about these questions if you haven't already. Some of you probably have. But think about these questions going forward with regard to, if those facts are in front of me, it would be the same as saying, well, you know what, if I knew, 1 out of 10 individuals who walked into the building, in my school building, had some sort of a physical illness that is very serious, what would I do different? Should every school district have a suicide prevention strategy? It's a question. We think yes. But we also think that, as it happens very often, and sadly enough, that we are engaged when a tragic loss happens, particularly tragic loss of suicide. That's when people go into the mode of, all right, what are the things we need to be doing? So preparation is obviously very important. But we feel that in order for us to be more prepared, and also for us to be able to help the community with regard to suicide prevention, we need to be more proactive. And that is a question a lot of the school districts struggle with. And because as we will go forward, you'll see that there are many variables involved in it, and also school districts by definition have many pressures and many demands on them, and so this becomes another source of pressure, in the sense of there's something else to be accounted for, particularly on the part of the administrators and higher administration. So should we, and we should, organize a plan. Now, do we have a crisis management team? How does our crisis management team take suicide into account? Is this part of their proactive work, or the crisis management team, that reacts when indeed there is a very overt and obvious threat that is provided to them? What are some of the systems that we interface with, or should we interface with, in the assessment and management of the youth that are at risk of suicide? Should it involve in only the faculty and the students? Should it involve other students that may be at risk? In what way should the parents and families be involved in this process? What mechanisms do we have in place in terms of helping youth that may be re-entering after a suicide attempt? I would ask all of you to think about the who you would think and how we are managing the students that may be at risk. How much monitoring? Who monitors? And how do we communicate the information about who is at risk in our building? Is your school district one of those school districts that talks openly about suicide? Does your school district include awareness and general information about suicide and suicide prevention? Very factual information, shared in some capacity with the school community as a whole. Does your school system has some function that they put in place in terms of the suicide prevention? September 10th of each year is World Suicide Prevention Day. That week is the Suicide Prevention Week in America. So it's strongly recommended that every entity and agency, as well as school districts, take it upon themselves to do something as a recognition that suicides can be prevented. And there are reasons why our youth think about suicide, and we need to help them with that. And we also we need to anticipate the kind of events and kind of circumstances that contribute to youth thinking about suicide, because thinking about suicide is not uncommon. In fact, is much more common than most people realize. Obviously, those students that have socio-emotional challenges, they are at high risk. We know that. But those students in particular, many of them who have challenges, they may or may not openly talk about suicide. So the question is, how do we find out if the suicide is in the picture? Talking about suicide is a challenge for many people, even for some professionals. Some professionals tell us that they really do not want to ask youth about suicide because they believe that by doing that, they are somehow putting their thought in their mind. And there is no evidence to support that. But we absolutely know that some administrators and some very highly trained and educated professionals still believe in that. So we worry about missing and dismissing and avoiding situations where indeed suicide may very well be in the picture, but it may not look like the typical picture. As an example of the typical picture of somebody who's depressed and they don't seem to have any hope, they are lethargic. So all the typical symptoms could be very, very misleading. So a kid that is gifted and a kid that has a lot going for himself or herself and is very up and energetic and may be missed because we may not think that perhaps asking about it is relevant, or would be perhaps wrong because they may not have thought about it themselves.
Max, this is Jennifer. I want to apologize about the slides. We lost your audio here at Kognito, and I think everybody has heard your presentation except for us. So we've lost which slide we're supposed to be on. Can you help us?
Well, I'm going on slide 14.
Slide 14. Okay, we'll join you there. And my apologies to everyone for the snafu on our side. Thank you. Keep going, Max.
Sure. So in view of what we said, we know for a fact resources are limited. However, at the same time, we know when we attend to those individuals who have socio-emotional challenges, that we absolutely reduce suicides. This is known over and over again. Question that we should be asking is that those youth who may have suicidal thoughts, who do they go to? You may say, well, they may go to no one. That is accurate. You may say that they may share it with their friend. That is accurate. You may say, well, the family may know something. That is very accurate. It may be the gym teacher. That may be also very accurate. So many people may know about the fact that a young person may be at risk, but none of these individuals may feel like, well, maybe it's my place to be asking, or how should I ask? So not knowing how to and being concerned about asking the right question or saying it the right way sometimes prevents people from asking the most life-saving question. Have you been thinking about suicide? Have you been thinking about killing yourself? Now, I asked that question before about the school districts and what messages, if you will, the school districts have been conveying about suicide prevention and suicide and the resources that are available. I would ask you at this point to think about your particular school district, particular school building, and say, are there messages at all? Are there any messages about suicide prevention that comes across universally? Is there any notice or any education given with regard to how people can talk about others, about their thoughts and their feelings in a way that doesn't create more complications and things do not get worse. So I would ask you that question because I certainly do not know the answer on this end. Who gets the messages? And what is the mechanism by which the message is conveyed? Do you or your central office, do you have a relationship with other agencies in the community? Is there a bigger collaborative, as in some involvement with the clergy on the outside, as in with the police department, as in with the fire department, as in with the youth serving agencies? Our goal fundamentally is to create a competent and caring community that we can all be part of. And that's what suicide prevention really takes in order to achieve that goal. It takes every one of us in terms of going forward. Who are some of the gatekeepers and stakeholders in youth prevention? Certainly school faculty, families and the parents, youth serving agencies, as I mentioned. Peers seem to be a very key factor in this process. The community agencies, other professionals, pediatricians, private practitioners otherwise, nurses. The nursing staff in schools often have the most revealing information. So should they be part of a general committee within the school in terms of prevention of suicide, in terms of knowing when and who and in what way are we going to be reaching those youth that are clearly, some of them that we know that they are at risk? How do we engage the youth themselves if we know close to 1 out of 10 youth that walks into our building every day has had plans of killing themselves? How do we engage them? How do we talk with them? Do we have the skill set to do that? Now, we have done a tremendous number of trainings across the state of New York, and more recently, in the last 2 years in particular, we have been interfacing with many school districts and providing some education and training for them, at the same time engaging and inviting them to be a partner in terms of telling us what the challenges are. And I would strongly recommend and ask you to write down, and please send it to us, as to what you see your challenges in terms of helping and assisting the youth and the families that are dealing with suicidal ideation or suicide attempts. So those challenges, I can share with you some that have been shared with me. Some staff have talked about the fact that it's literally time issues. Some staff talked about some procedural issues. Some staff has talked about some administrative issues. Some staff have talked about the fact that there are many systems involved, which is very accurate in management of a young person who may have thoughts of suicide. Certainly the school, certainly the family, certainly the police department as a transportation means, certainly the emergency hospital situations, certainly the private practitioners, and certainly the prescribers, to say a few. So you can imagine, in order to coordinate care for one young person who may have thoughts and may be at risk of suicide, how many different systems, and some are not in complete sync with what really we're trying to accomplish in terms of preventing suicide, as well as reducing the risk. What I mean by in sync is their mission is very different. And many school districts have spoken about the challenges in terms of engaging the families and parents about the concerns that schools have about certain youth who may be at risk. So I would urge you to highlight that and send it to me in terms of what the challenges are in your particular situation or district. Now we're going to move on in the few minutes to looking at some of the trainings that are readily available, and we would want you to be aware of them, and it will give you the resources to look into them further. And part of what I do is that they just be the contact person to kind of coach people through it to create a plan for suicide prevention going forward. The first one we have listed is creating suicide safety in schools. My colleague at the Suicide Prevention Center, Pat Brew, has been passionately committed person, very, very knowledgeable, and has contributed and developed many instruments, in fact, that are best practice and that are available to the school districts, and you'll be able to refer to them. So creating suicide safety in schools is not necessarily just teaching you the skills of how to do that, skills of how to prevent suicide, but it's more so about team building and staff preparedness. Creating suicide safety is about how to work with the resilient students, how to build in resiliency with students, how to plan for assisting a student who may be at risk, how to have a planned response when a suicide happens in the community, and how to respond, and certainly how to engage the parents and the families in this regard. The second, the training that I've listed, the suicide safety for teachers. This is a recently developed training, which is easily administered because of the demand is only 1 hour, versus the creating suicide safety requires basically a full day, a school day, for a team from a school to come forward. It's a team building and then planning and putting the ingredients together that you need in order to go forward. Suicide safety for teachers is to teach teachers and some of the other staff and to recognize the warning signs of suicide and understand their role in responding. It has proven to be very helpful, very effective, and is some basic information that anybody can learn. Next, I have listed trainings on postvention. Postvention is a relatively new term, refers to a planned response following a death due to suicide. And the purpose of doing postvention is, one, obviously, to help people heal and grieve appropriately in a way that doesn't activate and worsens the situation, and most importantly, doesn't activate other young people who may be thinking about suicide. So in that context, how to report, how to do memorials, how to discuss it with the students, all of that becomes very important. There are two trainings. One is Connect, called Connect. That is a 6-hour training. And the Lifeline Trilogy, that is also a full school day training that are available. However, if that is a time constraint, certainly there are other presentations and other ways to bring this information to the school districts if that amount of time at one sitting is not possible. we always say, and we strongly believe in that, postvention is prevention. When we do that appropriately, we actually engage individuals who, and particularly in this case youth, who may have been thinking about suicide, but they may not have known where to go, or they may not have known how to talk about it. And in this way, by following those steps, we actually help other people in the community, in the school community, and even outside, help them perhaps save their own lives. This training, comprehensive suicide risk assessment training, is intended for mental health and counseling professionals. I've been fortunate enough to initially co-pilot it with my colleague at the Office of Mental Health, and we have been delivering it to school districts and many other agencies for at least the last couple of years. It's an absolutely wonderful training because for the mental health professionals in schools, it really brings to focus many areas that routinely should be attended to. Most importantly, that attends to competency areas that we want to have to be universal. That means every mental health professional, regardless of their degree and mental experience, should have basic knowledge. As we know, many states actually are requiring trainings for licensing purposes for the mental health staff. So this is coming down very soon. The other training that we're in the process, I'm sorry, I skipped over one, is the one that we're in the process, and we have already interviewing a lot of school districts in order to put this together. The purpose of this, and different than what I spoke with before, was we're hoping that this particular training, and many of us across the state are looking at all the issues and all the obstacles and all the needs that the school mental health staff in particular have in order to help with the youngsters who have suicidal thoughts and manage them effectively in terms of being able to learn optimally, in spite of the fact that they're going through all those challenges. So this is in process. We're hoping that we get closer to a product that we can then start piloting. And all of you certainly are more than welcome to contact me if you would be interested in looking at this training and the one before for your counseling and school mental health professionals in particular. I'm going to now, in the few minutes we have left, I'm just going to talk about a few other trainings that are out there, and depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can take advantage of. These are not, technically speaking, they're not clinical training in that sense, but QPR is by QPR Institute is a very basic training, is an awareness training that you can present in 45 minutes to an hour to any population, any groups in your school. And it could involve your custodian or your cafeteria and food people, security guards, other ancillary people, teachers' aides, etc., and bus drivers, anyone. So, and also the suicide talk, along with QPR, is a relatively brief awareness training that you can bring into your school district. Safe Talk is a 3-hour training. It happens to be one of the best trainings that we have in terms of for anybody in the community, but it's for the 3 hours they actually learn some basic skills and address many of the stigmas that exist still to this date with regard to suicide and those individuals who have thoughts of suicide. Assist is a 2-day intensive training. Although it's not technically as a clinical training, it's many mental health professionals find and tell us that many of the skills that they're going to learn in suicide first aid that they learn through Assist, they haven't learned in graduate school, and they didn't even learn it on the job. So it happens to be new skills and very, very valuable and practical skills. Lifeline Trilogy involves by the Society for Prevention of Teen Suicide that addresses prevention. There are all independent trainings, prevention, intervention, as well as postvention. So those are three different trainings. I mean, they can be presented, it can be done in 3 consecutive days, it could be done 1 a week, or spread out. But there are also very, very valuable trainings that your school staff should be aware of. Now, I've just put some resources here that I would strongly recommend that you go to these references, because each of them in turn have a wealth of knowledge for you to download. They have a lot of free educational and informational information for you to take advantage of. Living Works has authored and developed a number of those instruments. So has the Society for Prevention of Teen Suicide, and also American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has a tremendous amount of useful information. And of course, the Suicide Prevention Center of New York State, that many of the trainings are actually listed there, and you can learn more about them. And additionally, these are some other resources that I've just shared here, so for your reference. We are at, the time is 12:46, so in view of wanting to entertain some questions, I would like to stop at this point, and thank you.
Okay, we'll let the questions come in. Thank you so much, Max. And our apologies to everybody online. We had a technical snafu where we lost Max's audio here. I hope that everybody else was able to hear the audio. I think you were. So we had switched to a simulation discussion. But in the meantime, questions are coming in. Thank you, Max. The first one, are there any trainings that you recommend that could be given to high school students who are looking to be peer responders to mental health crisis and suicide?
Absolutely. There are I wrote down sources of strength there. That I would strongly recommend that you look into it, but it's more about really a peer-run type system in terms of having a peer support system built in for resiliency and strength building and support. The training that I mentioned, Safe Talk, can be delivered to older teenagers, but with some qualification, it would be great when there are adults present. In particular, when the parents can be there with their young children, as in youth, so they can learn about some of the basics of suicide prevention and how to talk to someone about suicide when it's such an uncomfortable topic. So you can also contact me. Otherwise, we can talk about some other specifics that can be done for youth.
Okay, great. And I'll just put a little tiny plug in for Kognito's relatively new friend-to-friend simulation, which is intended for use in health class or life skills class. And we are just now crunching the data to submit that to the National Registry. So if you'd like to look at that, yeah, I encourage you to write to me, Jennifer Spiegler. Max, where can we find information about suicide safety for teachers training?
Me.
Okay. And there's your contact information on the screen now.
Okay, so yes, from me, and also if they go through the preventsuicide.ny.org, it's also listed there as a training, because these are some of the trainings that New York State routinely provides and makes available. So either way, you will get the information, and hopefully you will be able to schedule a training if you wish to do so.
Great. And a question about the training for the suicide risk assessment training for mental health and counseling professionals. Can you talk a little bit more about that, the intention behind it, Max, and how people can get involved?
The intention behind it is, although we do have through the Partnership Office of Mental Health and Columbia University, we do have the suicide risk assessment, which is a comprehensive suicide risk assessment presentation in a PowerPoint form. We have it for all mental health professionals. As I said before, we feel like there are unique and specific challenges and circumstances that school mental health professionals encounter that is not the case with other mental health professionals. So in that context, if you will, if your school district says, yes, we would like to sponsor this training, I would come in and present that training, and then as part of that training at the end, we'll have a dialogue and survey and look into the challenges that exist to incorporate feedback from the school mental health staff into the development of that instrument. So you could actually be a partner in the development, if you will, by participating in the initial training and giving feedback as to what gets in the way. Does anything get in the way? If not, wonderful. But if there are things that make the job more difficult, if there are challenges, if there are things that don't work well, we want to know about them so we can address them. Because coordination among the agencies is clearly one that is echoed over and over again.
Great.
I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I think so. And, you know, you talked about, at the top of your comments, you talked really a lot about the importance of everyone having a role in the community and also within the school. And I know that a lot of states have their suicide prevention training mandates. It's usually for certified staff or for teaching staff rather than everyone else. I wanted to say that here too at Kognito, we're very much proponents of the refining the safety net, making sure that everybody is trained. And I think, you know, from cafeteria staff to custodial staff to school resource officers, I just wanted you to reiterate that message for folks, because I think we pay a lot of attention to our mental health professionals in schools and to our teachers, and by and large, they make up just a little bit over half of the population of adults in a school system, in a school building.
Yes, and you said it well, Jen. I say that suicide prevention is about everybody having eyes and ears that are open all the time, and that's how we need to go forward. We will miss, absolutely, with no question, we will miss if we have, when it comes to suicide prevention, the silo mentality that very often we have as to there are only certain people that can talk about suicide, or there are only certain people. Yes, when it comes to making a suicide risk assessment, there are people who are specially trained to do that. But when it comes to being alert, being sensitive as to who may be at risk and who may be not just at risk, that may actually be thinking about suicide, we can't possibly expect a school social worker to be in every single building 24/7. It's just impossible to do that. But also we know that the youth that are at risk, that are seriously thinking about suicide, they do not necessarily want to talk to the mental health staff. They want to talk to a caring adult. That is why it's important to have those caring adults in all schools. And we know that. As you and I, when we have an issue we want to talk about, we think about who do I feel comfortable talking about it? It's not always the person that is designated with a label. And this is how suicide prevention is so different. Because if somebody has a infection or somebody has a fever, they're sent to the nurse, right? Because the nurses, that's their job, right? So, but when it comes to suicide prevention, the youth, 1/10 of the population of a school building who may have been thinking about suicide, we can be expecting the mental health professional to be on top of and be alert and be vigilant with every single one who may be thinking about suicide. That's why we need an army of people to feel comfortable and have the basic knowledge about suicide prevention to be part of this partnership.
Beautiful. That's a great place, I think, for us to close our hour. Max, thank you so much for this presentation. Everybody else on the call, thank you so much for spending your time to learn and for all of the amazing work that you do with kids every single day. So you look forward to getting the recording and the slides out to you, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.